What's going on, everyone? This is Ryan Ecker with Peak Endurance Solutions, and you're listening to the VO2 Max podcast. In this episode, I sat down with Caleb Guest, who is a coach out of Arizona. Primarily works with triathletes and runners. But in this specific episode, I wanted to sit down with him and chat about some of the differences between off-road triathlon versus on-road triathlon. So that's the kind of the running theme throughout this podcast as we dive into some of the unique differences in terms of like logistical differences as well as like physiological differences between racing a triathlon off-road or like an Xterra triathlon compared with racing an on-road triathlon. So if you're relatively new to off-road triathlon or you've never done one before, this would be a great episode for you to listen to, as we definitely cover some of the significant differences and key differences between off-road versus on-road triathlon. So if you had any questions related to off-road triathlons and what to expect and how to adjust or alter your training so that you're better suited to take on an off-road triathlon, then this would be a great episode for you. But also just if you're a seasoned veteran at doing off-road triathlon events, there's definitely some things that we get into in here in terms of how to approach training for off-road triathlon from a physiological standpoint that could definitely benefit anyone who's been doing off-road triathlon for a while. And then as well as those who focus primarily on road-based or on-road triathlons as well. Towards the end of the episode, we definitely talk about some of the differences between off-road and on-road and how kind of expanding your skill set by doing some off-road triathlons can have kind of a trickle-down effect and translate into better on-road triathlon performance. So hopefully you enjoyed today's episode as I sat down with Caleb Guest. I guess to start, just you give a background of yourself so that those listening have a better idea of who you are, what you do.
Caleb Guest, got into triathlons back in 2002 in college and raced triathlons through college, mostly sprint and Olympic, and then got into Xterra or off-road triathlons and mountain biking towards the end of college, 2006, 2007, and then, kind of got out of racing so much, kind of got into regular kind of business world for a while, but picked back up coaching in 2016. 2016 started working with Triplex down in Chandler and coaching primarily triathletes, but ultra runners, endurance mountain bikers, for a wide variety of different races. Let's see. USAT level 2 certified, USAC, so USA Cycling level 3 certified, got my CSCS with the NSCA, and I did the certified applied functional science certificate with the Gray Institute year before.
Okay.
So really like working with, a wide variety of athletes, but my passion personally in racing is in the off-road stuff. Mm-hmm. I would say some of my biggest accomplishments have been qualifying for the Xterra World Championships 5 times now and going 3, hopefully going 4 this year, assuming it goes off.
Yeah.
So I've been coaching full-time now since 2018. So this is year 3, 4. Managed to make it through last year, which was impressive. Fortunately, pretty much all my clients stuck around.
Nice.
Which was really cool of them to kind of hang with me, even though there were no races. But happy to see races have come back, and looking forward to what looks to be a really good 2021 season.
Yeah, it looks like everything's kind of slowly working its way back to normal. So
yeah, we were just down at the St. George 70.3, had a handful of athletes racing down there, so we just went up to check it out, and it went off super smooth. Um, didn't seem like there were too many issues. Utah's pretty relaxed with their restrictions, but
Mhm.
I mean, now with the new CDC guidelines, it feels like it's totally safe, and um,
Yeah.
I got no hesitation whatsoever for Coeur d'Alene.
Yeah. Yeah. I know obviously different countries is a different story because some are still struggling and others aren't, but
Yeah, I've got one athlete racing who was signed up for Ironman Vitoria Gustez in Spain
yeah.
in July, and that just got moved, so it got pushed to September, and she's going to defer until July of next year, just because. I mean, if you traveled internationally, can you really get out and visit the area and like do all the things that you want to do in an international trip besides just the race? So she
Right.
had to make that call in the last couple of weeks.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean in terms of the US, seems like everything should hopefully go off as planned and pretty smoothly. I mean at Tulsa, it looked like just like the old days, I mean, there's no masks necessarily that was required and didn't look like they were doing these kind of interesting like wave starts where they were separating people out,
Mm-hmm.
6 feet. And it was just kind of business as usual. And there wasn't really too many precautions that they were even putting into place. So yeah, I
Yeah, I
guess that,
imagine now that masks are not required if you're fully vaccinated, we're going to see it look a lot like it used to.
yeah. So, I mean, yeah, it's good
It
at
would
least in
only go
terms of
back to the mass start, right? Just go back to the mass start.
no way. As someone who didn't swim growing up and isn't the best swimmer, I would not endorse this. If I was significantly faster and I was ahead of most people, then maybe, but
Yeah, don't worry, just get out front.
yeah, but I can't imagine doing a mass start with like 3,000 people in an Ironman. It's just crazy.
You only got to do one. It was wild.
I wouldn't mind doing it once just to get the experience, but yeah, one experience would probably be enough. Um, but yeah, so you're a good one to bring on, and it's kind of why I wanted to bring you on to do a podcast is because you just have such a diverse range of experiences between on-road triathlon across sprint distance to Ironman distance racing, and then as well as the off-road triathlon, or Xterra as it's typically called or branded. And you've been to Xterra World Championships multiple times, so you just have such a diverse range of experiences across all different types of triathlons, and so you'll be good to kind of inform viewers and also myself to some extent, because I just have a very basic understanding of off-road triathlon, never really having competed in one. I obviously, at least from like a technical standpoint and like theoretical standpoint, understand how it works and like the physiology of doing the event, but have never done one myself. So for listeners, but also for me as well, I'm just kind of interested to pick your brain a little bit. So I don't know if you actually looked this up, but like triathlon obviously started back in the 70s. Do you know when the first like quote unquote official off-road triathlon was?
Yeah, actually, I looked that up, and I didn't write down that date, but I'm pretty sure I still have the window open. The
Okay.
first one was an Xterra, and it was in 1996.
Oh, okay. So it's
So
actually
1996, and it actually USAT has it on their website, but they stole it from the Xterra website.
gotcha.
It was originally in Maui, and it was called the Aquaterra. So it was open ocean swim, mountain bike race, and a trail run. But that was kind of when it all kicked off. So I guess
Mhm.
kind of just to clear up a few things, which can be confusing when you talk about off road triathlons. For the longest time, in even my introduction to it was that off road triathlons and Xterra were synonymous. Basically, all of the off road triathlons were Xterras. Um, to the best of my knowledge. Now, Xterra is a brand, like Ironman is a brand, right? So you can have off-road triathlons that are not Xterras, and it seems like more so recently we we're seeing more off-road triathlons that aren't necessarily Xterra branded.
Mhm.
So that confuses some people, right? They want to do an X. Do they want to do an Xterra, or do they want to do an off-road triathlon? Well, they're really pretty similar. It's just a branding thing. USAT now and the ITU have an off-road triathlon category for like US championships and world championships. So you can compete in the, North American off-road championships, which is not an Xterra, but is still an off-road tri. Mm-hmm. And then ITU held the first world off-road championships in 2008. So, reasonably recently, 13 years ago. So that kind of gives a background into, they're all off-road tris, but there are different ones out there. And it seems like we're seeing a growth in off-road triathlons and actually a decline in Xterra branded triathlons over the last, 2, 3, 4 years. The structure's kind of changed.
Interesting. So, and do you know, I don't know necessarily how much off-road triathlon is growing compared to on-road triathlon, but it seems like on-road triathlon participation is kind of plateaued somewhat.
Yeah.
Is off-road growing though more? Are more people kind of venturing and trying that out?
So I tried to go back and just look at, I picked the Xterra World Championships because it does kind of seem to be the pinnacle if you talk to people at off-road triathlon. I don't know a lot of people whose goal is to qualify for the ITU World Off-Road Championships. And so I went back and I looked at the number of finishers over the last 10 years. And it was steadily growing up until about 2015, 16, 17. And then it's kind of declined slightly over the last couple years. Now, I don't know if that's true of off-road triathlons in general, but I found that to be kind of shocking from the Xterra point of view. I would have assumed that it would have gotten to a certain point, maybe a cap, and would have stayed there. I know the 2018 race, I think, was pretty bad conditions, and so that may have, turned some people away in 2019. Mm-hmm. But I think just like with all of triathlon, it's probably tied to the economy to a certain extent.
Yeah.
Now personally, I feel like I know more people who are interested in racing off-road triathlons. And now that could just be the fact that, I'm in it more, so that, I then associate myself with people who are interested. But the races don't seem to be getting any bigger. And I don't seem to feel like I'm seeing more of them popping up either, which is kind of discouraging, because we have lost a few races have come and gone in the last 10 years that were really fun that just, didn't last for very long.
Yeah, I feel like the same kind of trend is happening with on-road stuff too. I just feel like more and more of them are going away as to coming around, or new races coming about. So I don't know if it's just a trend across triathlon in general, because there's just only a couple big brands that are running most of the races, or I'm sure there's many reasons.
It'll be interesting to see, the USAT is really pushing the kind of get back to grassroots racing this year in 2021. I think especially with, coming out of the pandemic and people not necessarily wanting to travel as far, trying to get people to race locally and support those local races. I really do hope we see a resurgence of the local sprint and Olympic distance, having started there and primarily done that for, the first 5-6 years that I was racing. I really enjoyed it. And I feel like there's a lot about triathlon that's missed when everyone thinks they have to do a half or a full Ironman.
Yeah, definitely.
Part of the joy of actually doing a triathlon is just being able to go out and do it on a weekend and not have to, commit 6 months of your life or a year of your life to, one specific event.
Yeah, Yeah, I'm with you on that too. There's just like, especially here locally in Arizona, there's more and more of them are just kind of going away, it
Yeah.
seems like. And yeah, it's really nice to be able to, obviously whenever like I personally race, I want to go do well, but yeah, there's something to just, travel in close by for a weekend, or even if it's just like right out our back door, just going out and doing it and giving my best, and then being able to just go out and have some lunch with friends afterwards or
Yeah.
dinner later with, and not making like a whole spectacle an event, like, just going to travel to do a lot of Ironman branded races. And so many things can go wrong when you travel, and the race itself is so massive that so many things can go wrong in the race, and it's just, there's a lot more
Yeah. There's
stress that goes into it.
something to be said for just being able to pack up your bag,
Yeah, yeah,
drive out your door to the local venue, maybe half hour, 2 hours away, have some fun for a few hours and go home and be able to get right back into your life. Like,
yeah,
and then you can
yeah,
do that, once a month,
yeah.
if you've got the means, because it's not going to totally beat you up.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, hopefully things kind of, if USAT's pushing it too, hopefully more on road and also off road triathlons start popping up just locally all over the country. Because I eventually want to go do some off road triathlon stuff as well. I'm slowly starting to get into some off road
There
cycling now that I have a gravel bike.
you go.
And
Step
then
one, mountain bike.
right, and there's just too many bikes to be had anyway. So the next bike
No,
that I
there's
want to
not.
get is, I mean, depending on how much you prioritize finances and having money. So yeah, at some point I would like to get into some off-road stuff myself as well. But yeah, so it'd be nice to just have some local options to pick and choose from, and not have to go travel every time I want to go to a race.
We are
Um,
fortunate in that we do have two. We've got
yeah,
the Iceman in February, which is
yeah,
semi off road, and then
freezing
we've got,
cold though.
well, it
The
was
water.
chilly, but and
Yeah,
then we've got Deuces Wild, which also still has the off road
yeah,
triathlon. So
yeah. The only thing that's annoying about all that, at least locally for people who are listening and they live in Arizona, I wish they had more races like in Tempe or even in other areas that aren't Tempe and Tempe Town Lake. Like you could do so many more triathlons out here that are, and there are some, but that are in like March, April, May, and then like October, November, December. There's like tri family racing for those who are local. They
yeah,
put on events throughout the year, but like one of the bigger ones that isn't Ironman 70.3 Arizona and Ironman is Cactus Man, and they have the sprints and Olympics in May. But like we had a lifetime event out here, and I have no idea if they're bringing it back or not in September.
yeah. It's unfortunate we're missing like the good March April events
Yeah,
that we used to have. Like, we used to have like a series of Olympics that were,
yeah, yeah,
March, April, that were a ton of fun. And then we had the early season, or late season, I guess, September. We don't have a September race really anymore, which was always nice. It was a little toasty, but and then there's really nothing October and November from an Olympic distance perspective, right? You've just got the half and the full, and that's when our weather's perfect.
I know. And the thing that annoys me, I mean, I love going up to higher elevation and doing like the Deuces Wild and the Mountain Man events, but I just personally do not do well beyond 2 hours racing at altitude. So I only ever do sprints up there. And even still, like it just sucks to go full gas at 7,000 feet when you're used to, 1,000 feet. Like
It's just different.
it's fun, but I wish there was more stuff like down here, like at 1,000 feet. It was taking advantage of the nice weather we have for like 6 months out of the year. So,
Yeah.
anyways, side tangent, but yeah, moving into some of the unique differences between on road and off road. So, like at least from my perspective, one of the things that jumps out to me from like a physiological standpoint is obviously on road is usually depending on the course, but usually it's more steady state effort from like sprint all the way up to Ironman. Whereas like off road, especially on the bike and the run to a slightly lesser extent, it's just so like stochastic. It's just all over the place in terms of your effort and your power and your pace and your output. So like from your perspective, what are some of the big differences that kind of separate off road versus on road triathlon?
Yeah, you you nailed it there for the most part. Is just the road tries that we do tend to be primarily steady state endeavors, right? It's, you know, you're going out, you're doing a 20K, a 40K, a 56-mile, 112-mile bike. That's all going to be done ideally, right? You pick a heart rate, you pick a power, you're just going to go out there and you're going to ride nice and steady for the duration. You just can't do that on a mountain bike. For the most part, the nature of the terrain dictates that your variability in effort goes through wild swings. You know, you can be going all out just trying to clear an obstacle to, you know, spending 10, 15 minutes, depending on the course, coasting down a hill. But at the same time with an elevated heart rate, because you're just trying to, you know, keep the bike upright. And then the run is the run's, you know, typically the same. One of the best parts about the off-road triathlons and the Xteras in particular that I've done is there really is a sense of in the race, like, let's throw the craziest stuff that we can throw at them. Yeah. So, and that starts with, you know, the swim is, or even with the starting time, right? So most of your off-road races start at like 9 o'clock. So they're not this typical like super early 6, 7 a.m. crack of dawn type event. It's more like, it's more laid back. Like, we're going to start a little bit later. And you know what? If it's a little bit hotter, that's just part of the deal. Like, you just got to be prepared for it. A lot of them will also do something unique with the swim, whether it's, you know, they're open ocean, or if they're at a place that has a beach, it's usually 2 laps. So you are going out, coming back in, running on the beach for anywhere from around a buoy to maybe 100 yards, jumping back in, swimming again. So they, you know, that adds a uniqueness. And then the bike rides, they're going to find the biggest, steepest, gnarliest climb that they can. They're going to make you ride up it at least once, if not like 2 or 3 times. Like, so a lot of loop courses, a lot of just real long climbs, and then trying to find, you know, like some steep kind of downhills, twisty turny, not your super technical from a actual like technical mountain biking perspective. So not a lot of like real gnarly rock gardens or any drops or anything. I mean, a beginner mountain biker can get through pretty much every off-road try I've done. They may have to get off once or twice, but mostly that's going to be because of just the steepness of the terrain, or maybe the looseness of the terrain. And then for the run, you know, from the run perspective, again, same thing. You know, I've had races go just straight up the side of the mountain. There's no trail. It's just like, hey, you're just going to run up that. The Sholo race was always one of my favorite. There was typically at least 1, if not 2, water crossings, and like, in a high water year, it's like legit swim water crossing, in all your running gear, right? So like, you just got to kind of be ready for anything. I tend to prioritize or find that when an athlete prioritizes strength, you know, and strength endurance work, especially on the run, that's just hugely valuable. You're able to then kind of tolerate those changes in pace a little bit better.
So, and then I almost kind of like to compare, for those who are maybe like runners or they've done running races before, like I kind of like to compare on-road and off-road triathlon to like road running versus trail running. Like, trail runners are kind of like your off-road triathletes, like just want to have fun with it. Like, they'll go like crush themselves, but like pound like 7 beers afterwards. And road runners are like, I only want like flat, smooth tarmac and nothing else, like no hills. Like, I'm just here to like run my 6-minute mile pace and get done and like go eat breakfast and go home. And I don't know. It's just like, that's kind of how I like to think about.
Yeah, no, like there definitely is the attitude where it's like, you know, you show up at the race and you want it to be as gnarly as possible. You know, you don't want like nice smooth, like, I mean, nice smooth single track's always nice, but you want these big epic climbs and these gnarly, fun, fast descents and something just wicked that, kind of crushes your soul a little bit. Because then when you're all said and done, like those are the things you remember.
Yeah.
If it's rainy and gnarly and muddy, like kind of sucks in the moment, but when it's all said and done, like you got a good story.
Yeah.
That's what really counts.
Yeah, definitely. Do they have any? I want to talk a little bit about like distances and formats next
Yeah.
because it varies obviously compared to on road. But do they have such a thing as like off road triathlon, but the bike course isn't necessarily mountain biking? It's like gravel cycling. Do they do anything like
So yeah, so I heard Dan Imfield talk about this at Endurance Exchange, probably 2019, maybe 2020, and there may be some gravel tries.
that?
I don't know of any. I also don't do any gravel riding personally, but I could definitely see an appeal for a gravel race. As gravel biking picks up, I feel like it's going to be a lot more like user friendly as far as like an introduction to something that's not a road triathlon, that's off road, that has a laid back vibe, that's safe, without having to have the skills that most people would feel they need to have for a mountain
Mhm.
bike race. I would be thoroughly interested to do one, if I had a gravel bike and I knew of one.
Yeah. The only reason I ask is because all I really have is like a cyclocross gravel bike hybrid. And so it's like if they had off-road events like that, like I'd be all game.
Yeah, no, then
Yeah.
you could definitely tackle, like you could do like Iceman, for instance, is the off-road try there. The mountain bike course is all fire road.
Oh, it is. Okay. So then I could
So
totally do it.
the only stipulation is I think you have to have flat handlebars.
Mm.
So you can't have drops, right? So your typical like cyclocross gravel bike has drops.
Hmm.
And because the Iceman is sanctioned as an Xterra, it is technically a mountain bike triathlon and thus requires a mountain bike or a bike with flat handlebars. Um,
Gotcha.
but yes, that bike could be done. I mean, you could easily do it on a cyclocross bike or a gravel bike if you have good handling skills, but there's some loose fire road for sure.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah. Just curious because I wasn't sure if there were like gravel specific races
I,
out
I,
there.
I would imagine there's a couple grassroots ones, and I think that hopefully we'll see a kind of those pick up. It would be fun.
Yeah. Be cool. Why not too? Especially, yeah, like you said, as gravel cycling gets bigger and bigger. So as far as like race distances and formats go, obviously with on-road triathlon, like your typical quote unquote standard distances like sprints, Olympics, halves and fulls, and there's obviously all sorts of weird offshoot distances in between. But like standard distances in off-road triathlon, for the most part, I've seen like sprint type formats and Olympic type formats or those kind of distances. Is that usually where it ends or is there more?
Yeah, it tends to be. You tend to see like most promoters will usually promote one distance. So they'll have just kind of like their off-road distance, which is somewhere between your sprint and Olympic distances. Now, when you get to the quote unquote championship level, so these are like, the Xterra Worlds, the Xterra US Championship races, the Xterra Regional Championship races, the ITU World Off-Road Championships, those tend to be pretty standardized in that they're 1,500 meters for the swim, somewhere around 18 to 22 miles ish on the bike, and then
Mm-hmm.
usually around a 10K run,
Yeah. Okay.
plus or minus a little bit. So that's kind of your championship distance or your points race distance if you are trying to score points for like the Xterra series. But then if a race promoter has a championship, they'll usually also have a sprint, and it'll just be like half. So it'll be,
Mm-hmm.
one loop swim, one of the bike loops, and one of the run loops. Now one of the tricks is I try to, kind of tell people this who want to do one is don't let the distances fool you. A championship Xterra or a championship off-road triathlon is going to take somewhere in the time range of an Olympic to a half. So it kind of falls like right in the middle.
Yeah, because the bike is so much slower, right, than like go 22 miles on road.
Yeah, so the bike, the bike's gonna be substantially slower. The run's usually a little bit slower. The swim, the swim's the swim. Now, outside of those, I've seen like a half distance race. I don't know where it is, but I feel like I've seen kind of like a long course off road. And I know there's a race in one of the Dakotas. I think it's North Dakota. It's called the Wilderman. And it's a full distance off-road tri.
Really?
So
like
2.4 mile swim, 112 mile mountain bike, and a 26.2 mile trail run.
Wow.
And one of these years I hope to get out there and do it. But it's like an event that like 20 people do every year. Like it's really small.
Yeah. Well, it probably takes, the winning time has got to be well over, even if you're a professional, like over 10 to 12 hours, right?
No, yeah. I think the winning time is normally like, I want to say north of 15 hours, but it may be like 13 to 15 hours or something.
Yeah. Just because that mountain bike would take so long.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you figure
probably...
if you're riding on fire roads, maybe you're doing, depending on the elevation, 12 to 15 miles an hour. Like, if you're cooking it, so you're probably riding more like in that 10 to 13 mile an hour range. So, 9 hours on the bike, 10 hours on the bike.
Yeah, that's pretty gnarly. But yeah, I'm sure there are longer ones out there too. I just usually most commonly see like the sprints and Olympics. And so at least, so like I build some training plans on the Training Peaks store and kind of publish them. And so usually I just stop at like sprint distance format and Olympic distance format Xterra stuff. Cause I'm sure there are longer things out there, but I haven't really seen them, nor have I really heard of anyone who's like, oh yeah, I'm doing this like full distance,
No, there would be, 100 people in the United States that may do something like that.
Yeah. We have one that's kind of like, well, you've heard of Project Dirkman, right? Like, I don't think Dirk, the guy who runs it, has done it the past couple of years, but it's kind of like a hybrid. I mean, like the swim is just a 2.4 mile swim in like Roosevelt. And then the bike ride is, I don't think there's any gravel on the bike ride. But the run is like half trail. So, you got like a little bit of a hybrid there. So, So, but anyways, I've definitely noticed, at least since I mentioned that I have like training plans on the Training Peaks store, like I sell just as many of the off-road version plans as I do on-road stuff. So it's been interesting to kind of see. That's almost why I've reached out and I was like, hey, I want to kind of pick your brain more on it. So
I've had one or two people approach me for coaching specifically because of the off-road background.
Yeah.
I think mostly it's still, half and full distance people, but there's definitely some interest there, and there is some unique aspects to really kind of breaking down a course and knowing what kind of skills you're going to need for a particular race.
And I want to touch on some of those unique things too, because normally like I have one friend who he wanted to do this mountain bike specific race, and so I built him a plan for that. And like normally when I get someone who's looking to do any kind of off-road event, like, with on-road stuff, your typical, like I'm doing a half or a full, like you basically just kind of will structure your training around like what kind of heart rate and power and pace you're going to like hold steady for the most part. And then you'll obviously look at the course and look at some of the potential unique aspects of the course. Like if there's a massive climb or something like that, or massive descent, that might dictate how you pace things somewhat. But for the most part, it's like a steady effort, like you said. And like we were talking about, but with off-road, it's just so variable. And it's so unique depending on the type of course that it is. So let's kind of run through like some of the individual disciplines and some of the, I guess, different approaches you would take to train for an off-road event versus an on-road event. So like starting with the swim, the swim's a swim, but there might be some Australian exits where you're kind of coming out of the water, running across some beach and then getting back in. So obviously that would be something unique you'd have to train for.
There's some uniqueness there. There's also some uniqueness in that where I feel like, especially now with the way that road tries are structured, a lot of it is like you want to get through the swim as fast as you can using the least amount of energy as possible, without knowing that most people aren't going to gain a ton of time in the swim. Now, depending on the course for your off-road try, you almost want to put a little bit more emphasis on the swim, because now where you get out of the water matters. So if you're a mid-pack swimmer and you get off and you have 100, maybe 150 people in front of you, but you're a really good biker, you now have to overtake a lot of people on a trail, and that's going to cost you a lot more energy. So I will maybe go a little heavy on the swim to try to pull someone up so that they can come out of the water a little bit further up, or maybe even, quote unquote, burn a match or two, so that they can get onto the bike in a good position, and not have to use so much energy at that stage. Because overtaking on the bike can really cost you a lot of energy, depending again on the course. If it's got wide, if it's a wide path, it's a double track, it's fire road, it's not that big of a deal. But if you're talking some tight single track where you could be stuck behind someone for a while, then it becomes a little bit more. The swim becomes a little bit more important. As far as like then the bike goes, you're still going to train your basic aerobic capacities the same way that you would for a road try. You still need to have a big aerobic capacity and a good engine. Where things change is as you especially get closer to the race and do some of that specificity, you really need to train that anaerobic capacity as well, or be able to go into it and come out of it several times. So whereas in a road try, maybe you set yourself up to burn a couple matches throughout the course of it on a few short steep climbs. Like here, you've got to be able to just kind of dig deep and come back pretty regularly. And so I feel like having that stronger, anaerobic side really does become that much more important. And you're going to get that naturally in riding a mountain bike. It's hard to go out and do a steady state, aerobic paced or powered based mountain bike ride, unless you've got, really smooth trails. But so I will try to get people to do some road riding for the aerobic side of things. And then, then on the run, like I think I mentioned earlier, is it's so strength based that, finding that balance between your strength endurance and your speed endurance is tricky, because you want to have the strength to handle the variable terrain and the load that the bike has put onto your legs to begin with. But like I've come into situations myself where I've been overtaken by someone, mostly because I just don't have the leg speed. And so if you neglect, just some high cadence, quick turnover type work, you could be caught on a downhill portion of a trail where you can't run any faster, just because your legs don't want to move fast enough. So another kind of piece that has to be taken into consideration is doing some like downhill focused running. Go out and run and focus on the downhill portion, leaning into it, getting those legs turning over.
So then where do you like balance between like time spent on road for bike and run versus off road on bike and run? Like if let's say I'm coming to you and I want to train for an Olympic distance off-road triathlon and I'm like a complete beginner, like is everything on the trails, or do you do, like you said, a good mix of some on-road stuff so you can focus on maybe more like base aerobic steady state stuff and then a mix of off-road stuff as well? Or
I mean, if the person, what I typically run into is people who are into off-road tries don't want to ride on the road, so all they want to do is ride on the trail. So then you try to structure it so they have some easier rides on the trail and some harder rides on the trail. If someone's open to using all of their bikes, if they have them, or doing some trainer work, then then I would definitely probably say you're on the trail, maybe it's 25 to 30% of the time at the start, right? And then as you get closer to the race, that switches. So now you're on the trail 60 to 70% of the time. Running's probably pretty similar. The only difference is you can typically, I don't know, I feel like you can kind of get away with running and keeping your heart rate under control more than the biking, because worst case you just have to hike up something.
Right.
Whereas you can only go so easy on a bike up a trail. So
right. That makes sense.
So you're just like with any training plan, right? You're going to get more specific as you get closer to the race.
Yeah, it's just the kind of specific looks different, obviously, depending on the race and the format and the distance and course and everything like that.
There would also be, and again, depending on the where the person's at as far as their level of experience, you would structure in like skills type sessions. Right. So where it really is, we think of technique work as being super important for swimming. But now when you come into like mountain biking, that also becomes super important.
Mm-hmm.
You can gain or lose a lot of time depending on how well you can handle your bike.
Mm-hmm.
You can be super, super fit, but if you don't know how to ride a mountain bike, then you're just going to get smashed, especially on downhill sections. So having some of those sessions that are geared towards, hey, get out. It's not a hard ride, but we're going to focus on, either vision or cornering or braking, and having some kind of guidelines in that respect, geared towards obviously what the course is going to look like.
Yeah, no, it makes total sense. And I mean, a lot of people who just focus on the on-road triathlon stuff too could obviously benefit from some of these things too, because as you're talking through that, I think of your typical like beginner triathlete. They do a lot of time like indoors on the trainer, or super like straight roads, and like they come to U-turns and races or tight turns and races, and they like don't know what to do. They got to like unclip or
or like,
just,
can you eat and drink while you're riding your bike?
Right. Like people just sit inside on the trainer for months and months, and then like get to a race and be like, oh my gosh, I have to have both hands on the bike. Like I don't know how to, just all these things. And so, and even like little things too, like you were mentioning on the run, most people wouldn't necessarily think of like, oh shoot, yeah, if there's like some really steep hills in this race, I got to know how not only to run up them, but then the downhill part of it too, like the leg turnover and getting your cadence up really high takes some like acclimation to get used to. And take some training. And some of this stuff, obviously, like 70.3 St. George, like we were just talking about, is a perfect course where like you got to know how to not only go uphill, but then you got to go down a 10% grade and know how to like get your turnover going. And so a lot of these things too apply to on-road.
When you're fatigued.
Right, under fatigue. And so, it's just obviously off-road events like brings all this stuff into your forefront more glaringly, because you like almost have to do it, or else you're going to like go off the trail, or you're going to be just getting passed left and right. So it's a lot of on-road triathletes probably benefit from doing some off-road stuff in terms of their safety on the road and their skills.
It's the two they can seem so different, your road tries and your off-road tries, but there's some great cross training aspects if you're a road triathlete and you're interested in like getting into gravel or getting into mountain biking. Like you can go out and you can ride a bike, and it's semi-specific, but it's going to be totally different than what you normally do, so it's going to be kind of good for like an off season. Same if you're an off-road triathlete, like myself. I love doing the road races primarily as they can be great training for then getting ready for the off-road. Like I mentioned earlier, with the Xterra Worlds being pushed into December this year, I'll either look at either some Xterras or some off-road tries that I can do, but also some local, maybe Olympic and half distance even, that I can use as kind of benchmark sets or good long aerobic type training days, just to kind of test where my aerobic fitness is at. Just add some variety too, which is really a lot of fun. Kind of keeps things interesting.
Yeah, yeah, no, and that's a good point too, because I know, a lot of athletes will get into just doing like the half Ironman kind of cycle every year. And yeah, it burns you out after a while if that's all you ever do. And you're like, just on the
Yeah.
trainer all the time or just riding the same roads outside. So yeah, the variety is obviously awesome. And so, yeah, that was good. You answered one of my future questions I had too, which was like, how do you kind of approach balancing racing those two different styles of triathlon, which I'm sure more and more people are going to get into, obviously, as like off-road stuff gets bigger and bigger. You'll probably have more of the athletes who want to do both. And
I hope so.
so, yeah, yeah, hopefully. I mean, just it's fun, add more variety, and then, yeah, you're just not doing the same thing all year. One other thing I wanted to touch on quick before we kind of wrap things up was strength training. So strength training, obviously, as more and more athletes are kind of catching on, is it's really important for endurance athletes to be doing some strength training. Do you approach strength training with those who are focusing more on off-road triathlon differently compared to those who do on-road, or is it pretty similar?
No, it'd be pretty similar. You know, having the CSCS and the CAFS certifications and a strength training background, I really like to emphasize strength training kind of with every athlete. I feel like it's extremely important, not just from a performance perspective, but also from an injury prevention perspective, and a longevity. If you've got a good foundation of strength training, I think you're just going to be able to participate in the sport for longer,
Mm-hmm.
without getting so injured. So I'll give athletes kind of as much strength training as they're willing to handle, several hours a week, and then kind of taper it out. But I would do that for both as we got closer and closer to an event. Um, it's probably even a little bit more important for the off-road athlete,
Yeah.
just because you've got to have you don't get in a stable, solid position on the bike and just sit there,
Mm-hmm.
right? You've got to use the whole bike, or your whole body during the whole bike. As you're balancing or cornering or getting around an obstacle, and then same thing on the run, right? It's not just get into a smooth, steady gait and go. It's you got to go up on something, you got to go lateral, you got to maybe do some rotational stuff. So having that mobility becomes super important. I think most athletes are going to get some of that as they do their biking and their running, their specific race stuff. So yeah, I guess I would encourage those off-road athletes to do more of it. But I think it's important for everyone.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And it seems like too, it'll just, especially if you focus on the off-road stuff, it'll just make you more durable too, and just able to handle like the more severe swings and like shock that your body's getting from, like going on rough terrain on the bike to, like emitting really high power outputs going up a hill, and then like having all the pounding from running down steep hills. It's just,
Yeah.
there's just more robustness that's required. And the strength training seems like it could obviously help with that. Um, so yeah, anything else that you like have kind of found over the years that's unique in terms of how you approach training someone for an off-road versus on-road, or do you feel like we've kind of touched on some of the big picture items?
No, I feel like we definitely touched on kind of the big picture items. The few things that that really come to mind when I think back on just kind of the racing that I've done is, for anyone who's interested in getting into it, is definitely don't be fooled by the distance. Don't look at it and go, oh, it's a half-mile swim and a 12-mile bike and then a 3-mile run. Like, it won't take that long, because that distance could take you a couple hours, especially depending on the terrain. And then, if you can get out and pre-ride something, definitely, pre-riding a course becomes that much more important. or even pre-riding the run course often, so you have an idea of kind of what to expect on race day from a terrain standpoint, but also to a just kind of where does the course go standpoint, becomes, I feel like, a lot more important than when you're on the road or on a smooth path where it's just like, well, I know what 10K is going to feel like running on the road. Like, I don't know what 10K is going to feel like running on this set of trails.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. So I was going to ask you if you could give like one piece of advice to anyone looking to get into it, what would it be? But would that have been your answer, or do you feel like you have something else?
I would tell someone who's interested in getting into it to give it a try. Like,
okay.
Don't be too intimidated by it. Put in the work, but I mean, worst case scenario is like you gotta get off the bike and you gotta walk a section.
Yeah.
Or you find yourself walking up some of the steeper hills, but the atmosphere's pretty laid back, and I feel like once most people do their first one, they're pretty hooked.
Yeah. Cool. Well, you sold me. I'm going to take the drop bars off my gravel bike, throw some flat bars on there. I'll be at the next one.
Next year, 2022.
Would I even be able to throw? I guess I could throw drop bars on it. Why not?
You throw you just put flat bars on.
Sorry, flat bars. Yeah.
The only problem is you'd need like a whole new like shifting mechanism.
Yeah, that's the only thing I'm thinking about.
Shifting mechanism and brake mechanism.
Braking. I could always
just go single speed. You don't have to worry about it.
Yes, single speed. I could just saw off the drops. And then it's technically flat. Or I'll just look out for some like gravel specific off-road tries and see if they have any of those, because I'd actually be like wildly interested in that.
Just borrow. I mean, you've got the fitness. Just borrow someone's mountain bike and do Iceman.
Yeah, that's true. I could always do that as well.
It's just pedaling on a fire road.
Yeah, we got tons of those in Arizona. I don't know why someone doesn't put together like a gravel specific off-road try. We got plenty of fire roads you could choose from. Thank you for tuning in to today's episode. If you liked what you heard in today's episode, please feel free to leave us a review. Those reviews are greatly appreciated and help spread the word about our podcast, as well as help us improve the content that we deliver to our listeners. And then finally, if you know of anyone who would be interested in listening to our podcast, please go ahead and share our podcast with them.